Welcome to the latest edition of our A.T. Kearney Procurement and Analytics Solutions The Wave of the Future podcast series. I'm Helen Clegg, and I'm joined today by Ira Gaberman and Robyn Wright. Today's podcast topic is the role of CPOs in times of change. Before we get started, a little background on our speakers. Ira is a partner with A.T. Kearney and is based out of London. Ira currently heads up the Leadership and Change team within the Organisation and Transformation practice. Robyn is a principal at A.T. Kearney and is also based out of London. Within the procurement and supply chain arena, Robyn specialises in global operating model design, leadership development and transformation programs for large corporations. Robyn and Ira, welcome to the podcast. The world is changing extremely fast, and it is true that today the only constant is change. To frame our discussion on the role of CPOs in these changing times, what strategies are organisations employing to navigate this sea change? Ira, what are your thoughts?
Well, I guess what I would say is that first, there's many organizations that actually struggle with the same question. And plenty of examples of organizations that have failed significantly in the face of change. One, to identify and understand it, and certainly understand the magnitude and the potential impact on their business. And then also those who have, within the organization, identified the need, and one would argue have actually had individuals within the organization who had prepared very appropriate, what would have been very impactful solutions, but weren't able as a wider entity and enterprise to move to action and take those necessary decisions. And I think we all know names of those kinds of organizations: Kodak, BlackBerry, even Motorola with the smartphone are examples of organizations who fail to really anticipate and understand the kind of scale of change, and even where there was that knowledge and that willingness to do things differently within the business, they just didn't have the authority, and the decisions weren't taken. But there are organizations who have obviously addressed change really well, organizations who are very adaptive. And one only needs to look into the U.S. and look at things like the S&P, the highest cap companies, and you can see that over the course of the last 60, 70, 80 years, there's only a small handful who have managed to actually stay in that list, which is a testament to a very small number of organizations who have constantly redefined and adapted themselves to really dramatically changing markets over those decades. And there's no one real strategy that all organizations should undertake in the face of market changes. So what good organizations, though, are doing is that they're investing in their foresighting ability. So this is their ability to really have kind of deep tentacles out in the market, both across their own internal enterprise and well beyond, to pick up the small ripples and understand what those could mean and what the implications are for the organization, and then build the agility to surface that kind of early warning and insights so that the people with the authority can take the right decisions. So this is around moving to action. And this is having structures and decision authorities, close enough to where the information is actually captured, so you don't have to go through multiple layers and get the delay of ultimately not moving. So that's not really a strategy. That's more kind of at the quite micro level, but really well-performing organizations are doing those three things very well, which is around good foresighting, the ability to take decisions and move to action quickly. And I think those are the things that you see organizations doing in the face of change.
Robyn, how does this translate through into the procurement function?
Well, it's interesting because that degree of change out in the marketplace means that procurement functions need to be really responsive. And they're looking quite hard at their operating models. We're seeing many organizations saying that their current setup is only lasting between 18 months and 2 years before there's a challenge as to whether they've got the emphasis right and the roles focused correctly across their procurement function. They are advancing responsiveness both to the supply and to the business change by increasing supplier and business connectivity. And sometimes that's even with discrete roles being created with dedicated supplier relationship management leads, people who look at only the suppliers who are established. They're not doing any sourcing. They're just managing post-award contracts and big supplier relationships. or business relationship managers who are focused on the interconnectivity between the service procurement gives and the functions it serves, and indeed to the business as a whole, and make sure that procurement can be responsive. Procurement is understanding better the need to listen, to take soundings and report on customer views, and to adjust based on the sort of balanced scorecards that it's hearing. But it needs to be responsive also to supply market change, and that's available sort of instantaneously. It makes the world sort of smaller, and the supplies coming in and the problems in supply are highlighted faster. It doesn't really make the fixes faster. You've still got to have the strategic emphasis to be able to respond when you hear about these things.
So, Ira, what key skills do successful CPOs need to lead their organizations in these times of change?
So when we talk about leadership, and this isn't unique to CPOs, I think we would argue that there's a certain sort of skill set and mindset that really all senior leaders in businesses need to have. But when we talk to senior leaders, what we talk about is they need to have a balance between really kind of three spheres, for lack of a better term, and that is the strategic sphere, the transformational sphere, and the operational sphere. And really, and the balance that they need to play across those will vary, and they'll need to flex it depending on the stages and needs of the business at any points in time. And there's absolutely a relationship between the relative importance of those three spheres, depending on where a leader is in their own sort of professional development and progress within the organization. So the balance that's right, or the range of balances that are right when you're an aspiring CPO, so really a mid-level leader, will certainly be different than what that balance is when you're a CPO and a senior leader. But with CPOs, we sort of take the view that they wouldn't be where they are if they were not already great operational leaders. So they've got the ability to manage teams and make sure that they're delivering on defined targets. And we treat as a given all the kind of core procurement knowledge and expertise. But really the difference and kind of differentiator, if you will, between really high-performing CPOs and really the rest is that high-performing CPOs are also very strategic in mindset, so that they are really, I would say, sincerely interested and able to anticipate and spot the kind of market changes that we talked about earlier and frame them in terms that are relevant for the wider business. So they need a commercial sensitivity. They need to be able to understand. They need to be able to speak in the language that resonates with the business. And if they can't do that, then they will not have a place at the table, and they will always be just a service provider, an internal service provider to the business, but they will never be a partner to the business. And similarly, they need to be very transformationally oriented. This really requires a kind of curiosity and interconnectedness ability, which is around how do you really build out a really wide and deep network of individuals and organizations within and outside the business that basically help provide you with information and knowledge and soundings so that your recommendations are really evidence-based and you have deep confidence in them, but also a wider network that helps you position the role of procurement, your own role within the business, and your ability to influence that. And as I said earlier, these are really the same kind of mindset and skill set that really all senior leaders need to have.
Robyn, Ira just talked about the transformational, strategic, and operational skills that leaders, including CPOs, need in times of change. What, in your view, are the key soft skills that leaders need?
I think Ira touched on having to be an influencer more than a doer. So if you think there is more change ahead, you have to get folk to adopt risk management actions, to look at defensive and aggressive strategies, and to adapt more quickly to the actions that they're going to be doing in the procurement department through the processes that you've laid down and the tracks that they have to do to deliver the service that is core to procurement. But you've actually got to change the balance of people's focus. And funnily enough, you actually have to carve out time and focus for yourself on the strategic planning that Ira mentioned, and away from that operational activity, to do that change, it's a choice that you make about how you spend your time. And there are more choices for a CPO. You can leave operational problems to your top team. And the best CPOs don't do everything. They don't manage all the information. They don't juggle every supplier interaction and core supplier needs as they put their time into showing true leadership by having some clarity of direction and focus, and then put their efforts into what's going to matter for the future, and also put their persuasive passion into making sure people put their time against those future-oriented actions, against risk management, against the more hard-to-define things. That's what the leaders are doing. And that's tough, because that's individual choices. It's about sitting down, and today it's easier to action the thing that's come up today, not to action the thing that's going to hit in 3, 5, 9 months' time.
Ira, I want to talk about the workshop on personal leadership qualities you ran at the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supplies event called Fellows of the Future. For listeners who are not familiar with CIPS, it is a global organisation run out of the UK, with the highest level of membership being a fellow. Ira, when you asked participants to indicate the 2 most important responsibilities of a leader, what were your findings, and did the results surprise you?
So the results were not surprising. I'd say they were quite aligned with our experience that we've had with other organizations and leaders, both in procurement and leaders we've worked with from other functions, both corporate and operational functions. And what we see, and it's pretty consistent, I mean, you're going to hear some pretty common threads between the comments that Robyn and I are making in response to your questions. So what we see is that aspiring leaders, people who are really in middle leadership roles, are very focused on the operational sphere. So, that one of the 3 spheres that I mentioned earlier. So they're leading teams. They're very focused on achieving and demonstrating the achievement of defined, quite tangible targets. And they want to lead, and they want to be seen as leading these teams to action. And for them, that's how they really define and see the priorities of those roles. And that's very different than people who are in senior leadership roles, because their priorities are different. The number one priority by far, and I don't have the statistic in front of me, but it was significantly higher than all the other dimensions. So the number one priority for fellows who are more senior within their organizations is to future-proof the function. And that's the language we used against that component. And what this is about is this is around them positioning the function to be more strategic and more value enhancing to the business. This is about them repositioning the function to not be an internal supplier, but really be a true partner to the business. And this is also them understanding that procurement can deliver value in multiple ways, well beyond the kind of traditional ways that most people associate procurement with. And I can touch on that separately. And related to that, so really their second priority, and I would say a second by a distance, but still far more than all the other components. So their second priority was really understanding that their success, personal success, and the success of the function was really partially dependent on their ability to develop strong and quite broad networks across the business, where they're able to demonstrate the value that procurement can bring more broadly, but also that they are part of a conversation. They're at the table when the business is talking about the issues that are critical and relevant to them and of greatest concern. So one, they're there on a timely nature. They're always recalibrating for themselves what is most critical at different points in time, and how can procurement as a function continue to serve given those different challenges as they emerge. And interestingly, not only did we talk about this with SIPs and the participants, but you may know that we run a regular assessment called the Assessment of Excellence in Procurement, the AEP survey, which is really a global exercise to identify the different performance levels of procurement organizations across public and commercial sectors, across all industries and geographies, And we have well over 1,000 data points within that database. And we just completed the most recent round this past year. And in that round, I think we had about 400 different organizations participating. And what that really showed is it showed that the highest performing procurement organizations were significantly more aligned in terms of the procurement strategy and the procurement plan with the business strategy and the business plan. So there was a very clear relationship between those. It was recognized by the business, and that these same procurement leaders were able to also influence the strategic plans of the business themselves by bringing new insights, new challenge, and new opportunities to the business, some of which is around how do you introduce the role of the wider value chain into innovation and into meeting some of your operational goals and targets. And then, not surprisingly, the AP also really highlighted that the highest performing procurement organizations were also far more networked across the business and had a very different kind of, you would say, professional standing and status within the organization. And again, I don't have the percentages in front of me, but there was a significant distinction between the highest performing procurement functions and really the rest of the pack.
So, Ira, just briefly going back to the SIPS Fellows of the Future work that you did or workshop that you ran, you also asked participants what support they would need to help them operate successfully as a leader. What were your findings for this question?
Yeah, so the findings were slightly different, but directly related to the other findings that we just spoke about. The Fellows of the Future, the aspiring fellows, what they're really looking for is they're looking for increased responsibility. They're looking for an opportunity to continue to test and challenge their own skill set, hone their capabilities. They're also looking for an opportunity to have the senior support to take on greater challenges and to really demonstrate what their capabilities are. So this is very much still focused around the operational sphere. It's still very much focused on them continue to hone their craft and continue to demonstrate and build their internal brand. And that's really what kind of support they're looking for. So they're looking for opportunities and they're looking for support. The current fellows, so those who are more senior in their organizations, obviously have that already, and there's a degree of confidence that comes with that. What they're really looking for is they're looking for access. And it's not access to opportunity, it's access to the conversations, it's access to being part of the decision-making group. So this is around how do they really continue to extend their network further and further within the business. But what they're also looking for, and this is also critical for them to be able to deliver value, is they're looking for an organization that's open to challenge, and they're looking for an organization that has a culture of collaboration. So, these are things that they can influence. These are things that they cannot directly create and directly control. They're important, but they're just one important player amongst many within these large complex enterprises. And these are the kinds of things that they're saying they need to help operate successfully as leaders.
Robyn and Ira, as we've been talking about leaders and leadership development in this podcast, I'd like to ask you what was the single most important action you took in your career when you look back on it from where you are now?
Briefly, I think for me it's listening to feedback and working on some root causes on why I do what I do, act like I do, and deliver what I do. So my focus and my career trajectory has always been influenced well when I've listened hard to what others are telling me. And do you know what? It's easier to listen when you're talking to someone whom you respect and who's part of what I would call your sponsorship network. Having sponsors and having people who rely on you and whom you rely on to be advocating you is really critical. And you gain that relationship when you listen. So definitely, I would say turning my radar on and listening hard.
So I think I'll answer the question slightly differently because I'm not sure I can focus on a single action, if you will. But what I will say is I think one of the most important sort of attributes or kind of commitments that I've made that has helped me tremendously in my career is that and I say this with absolute sincerity, is that I am deeply interested in every person I meet and every person I work with. And that I try and I feel I'm open to learning from every single interaction. And that could be from somebody who is a peer, it can be from somebody who's senior, but it can equally and sometimes far more be from people who are junior. And I think that that's really allowed me to help understand the kind of human dynamic that sits behind mobilization and getting teams to take decisions and take actions that sometimes feel personally uncomfortable, but are the right things to do for the business and for the customer. And, I would never advocate doing something that was really to the great disadvantage of any individual. But this is around really helping to move teams to something that's a big and broader goal than just personal goals and objectives. And I think a lot of that comes from really just being sincerely interested, being truly open, and really learning from all interactions. And related to that, I would say, is being willing to take chances. Life is boring, or life could be boring. I don't feel my life is, but life could become boring. And there is, it's fun to, frankly, always have new challenges. I think that's also what allows us in teams and organizations to achieve breakthrough. It's to not always just take things that are safe and straight, but be willing to be agile, flex, and take some chances. And so I think those are probably the things that have, I've looked back on that kind of been quite important for me and how I navigate my own career and how I try to bring impact with my colleagues and with my clients.
As we come to the end of this podcast, what do you both think are the main challenges for future CPOs?
Challenges for future CPOs. So I think one of the biggest challenges for future CPOs is that, we started a conversation talking about the fact that market dynamics are changing at a rate that is faster than has been in the past. And the businesses need to be very flexible and very agile to respond to that. And what organizations need to do is really to be more networked, to be more connected, to take intelligence from all sources, to be able to take risk and to take chances. And I think as a result of that, the perception of how value gets generated is changing. So value now is increasingly seen to be coming from these kind of collective breakthroughs, the power of the collective. And there's lots of terms out there around connected intelligence. We can talk about that on a different podcast because I think that's a really critical and increasingly important organizational capability. But for CPOs, part of the challenge is this is a new way of operating. It's kind of a new way of operating for most organizations. It's certainly a new way of operating for most leaders and absolutely for CPOs as well. And they need to embrace it, and they need to help navigate it, and they need to create a role within that. And I would also say, which maybe is a little bit more unique for CPOs and other leaders, is they have a kind of a secondary challenge associated with this, or partially as a result of this, which is the way the procurement organizations are seen to deliver value is of a completely contrary nature. And there is a risk, and I can't say that it's there at the moment, but there is a risk that value will increasingly be seen to be less critical. All right. And what that is that the way procurement is traditionally seen to add value is through things like standardization, rationalization, compliance, things of that nature that are inherently at odds with networks agility, flexibility, connectedness, and things of that nature. Now, I truly believe that procurement drives value in both realms. Because if you think of the role procurement can play along the entire value chain and creating those networks within the supply base to bring real innovation and speed to their organizations, you can see that they have an important role to play there. But the perception of value around procurement, I truly believe, is more focused on a quite narrow and quite traditional view. And I think for CPOs, I think they need to help shift that perception. And I think that's one of the things that CPOs will increasingly need to do and be doing.
So I just wanted to say about the key challenges for the future CPO that you actually need to build on that point Ira was making that says there's a strategic networking activity. And then there's this perception that procurement does compliance and process management and is about governing strict rules, and it's a red tape organization. Now, actually, for the CPOs, they need to do quite a lot of work within their own organization still to differentiate between the different sections of the procurement offer to the business. One section is a strategic value service that they give. It's about delivering sourcing value, connectivity to suppliers, risk management, and driving suppliers to a better cost base. That's a very strategic positioning for the organization, and it requires senior people doing differentiated tasks. But there is another element to procurement, and often it's too blended in single tasks and single roles, which is this customer service provision, which keeps the wheels on the road. It's making sure that purchase to pay flows. It's making sure that buying channels are obvious to users. It's making sure that supply networks are working, delivering on time, and that you have some form of supplier performance relationship going on through the contract terms of your suppliers. So there's an operational duty of procurement, and that customer service element needs to be in the mix, but it's a different mix from the value piece. And actually, if you can differentiate well, you can hit on what Ira was talking about, which is this connectivity piece, which needs to happen in that strategic team. And you can show clearly when you do your balanced scorecarding how you're delivering those two sides of the procurement equation, the strategic value service and the customer provision, in one place, in one function, delivering two different things.
And finally, Robyn, to wrap up the podcast, what advice would you give to aspiring procurement professionals who have their eye on becoming a chief procurement officer?
I think it comes back to that question that you had for me earlier around the most important action I took in my career. And it was about getting sponsored. So make sure you deliver on your commitments. Make yourself a part of someone's key to success. And that sponsorship will come. But you also need to do a flip side of that. You need to be the sponsor to a team below you. This is a chain. Actually, to be a leader, you have to have followers. So make sure you look up and you look below you and create that suite of followers.
Robyn and Ira, many thanks to you both for your insights into leadership and the role of the CPO in times of change. Thank you for being my guest today. I'd also like to thank our production engineer, Tom Klein. Thank you for listening to this edition of The Wave of the Future. You may also wish to listen to another of our podcasts entitled What Makes an Effective CPO, featuring Enrico Rizon and Kate Hart. If you have any comments on this podcast or have a suggestion for a podcast topic, please share your thoughts via Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @ATKPAS. This has been an AT Kearney Procurement and Analytics Solutions podcast production. Join us again soon for our next Wave of the Future podcast.